Welcome to ACC Nation, featuring sports news and special guest interviews. Here's Will Ojanen and Jim Quist.
Welcome to ACC Nation. That's Will Ojanen. I'm Jim Quist, and our special guest is Megan Gower with her Hoop Stats. Hey, it's time to talk some serious business about basketball. And that's why we have Megan back. She was with us last year. We are going to take a look at women's basketball, which has been growing in leaps and bounds. Some things I want to run by you that has absolutely nothing to do with bracketology, just to get your impression about how it's affecting the game and how it's affecting teams and why the perspective on basketball in general, women's basketball specifically, is changing so much. It's really dynamic, and I absolutely love this. So, but first, let's just jump right in to where we are in the season. We're into the conference battles. What do you see in a broad scope? What do you see taking place at this point in the season?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think we're seeing a pretty clear-cut kind of top-tier teams on the women's side at this point. I think honestly not much difference there from I think what was expected as the preseason top teams. Most of those teams are still in that group, but I think there's just been a clear handful of teams that have kind of been playing at that top level. And then I think we're starting to see that with conference play now getting underway, you're learning a lot more about the teams outside of that group. I think it can be hard to judge just where everyone sits when there's a lot of sporadic non-conference games and there's not a lot of similarity in who's playing who. But as we get into conference play, I think we're learning a lot more about that next tier of teams too.
So it's very challenging when I sit here and look at the AP, which I just sort of like, okay, whatever. I'm not going to throw it completely out. The baby and the bathwater can't all go out the window, but the AP is there, the top 25. And then I go over to the net rankings. And there's some significant difference between the two. And something that you pointed out on your site in regard to how it's impacting bracketology is those Q1 wins. And talk to us a little bit about how important that is. We had this conversation with Jason Carmelo about the guys, and he was talking about how important some of these early season games were and how it impacted what was coming up. Is that the case also with women's basketball, that some of those earlier games, those non-con games, have made an impact on how teams are ranked at this point?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case on the women's side. And this is the first year we actually have quads on the women's side, which is, I think, a great move in the right direction for the women's game to be more similar to the men's there. Not that the men's game is always the right way, but I just think it is much more clearly defines kind of what a top game is. And like there should be differentiation between home versus on the road and things like that. So I think it's good to see that coming to the women's game. And I think that's especially the case that those non-conference games are kind of driving the conversation right now when we look at like the one seed conversation, because when you talk about around the ACC nation, so like a team like Notre Dame, like non-conference wins over USC, UConn, Texas, like that's doing a lot more for them than any ACC win that they have right now, and why that they're kind of projected to be on the one line. And I think that's the non-conference wins are really what's differentiating your top six teams amongst each other right now.
So this has got to make a little bit of it has to be a bit of a challenge. And we talked about this the last time you were on the show, about how challenging it is to actually sit down and look at all of this information and project where teams are going to be. Is it any easier this season?
I don't think it's easier this season. I think it's maybe even harder because as much as it's the first time we've all seen quads, it also means it's the first time the committee has quads. So it's a little harder to estimate what they're going to do with that information. And I think we can infer a lot of things from how they've interpreted other information in the past, but it's still kind of the first time we're seeing it on the women's game, which just adds an extra layer of challenge to putting this all together.
So nobody should get comfortable. That's, that's
Yeah, I think we'll learn more once we get into the first like seed reveal, whatever that is. It's got to be in the next couple of weeks of those top 16 seeds, and I do think a lot of it, the thought process is still the same, but obviously a lot of basketball still to play, and conference play has a way of shaking up a lot of things.
indeed. Will.
Before we really dive into your latest bracket, I was kind of looking over. I was looking at the bracket itself before going down to the conference list, and I just thought, wow, there's a lot of Big Ten teams, and still got to remember which teams are now in the Big Ten, which teams are now in the SEC. And but anyways, the Big Ten has 13 teams in your latest bracketology, so I'm going to assume this is far and away the best conference in women's basketball.
I think in terms of depth, yes. I think the SEC probably has the edge at the top. I think the top of the SEC is a little bit more competitive, but in terms of depth, yeah, absolutely. The Big Ten has just really stood out this year, and that's why they have 13 teams in. Obviously, some of these conferences have gotten a lot bigger than they were a year ago, so that's playing a role in how many teams are getting in from some of these bigger leagues. There's no more Pac-12 to put a good chunk of teams in, and those are kind of spread across a lot of these different leagues. And then I think we're seeing a case too where this season it just feels like some of those mid-major teams just haven't picked up the kind of big wins that you need to pick up in the non-conference to make a case for some of these leagues to be, two or three big leagues. I think we're only seeing maybe like an Ivy League and maybe the A10 that are looking like they're potential multi-bid leagues right now.
So just kind of looking over the top line in each region. You've got South Carolina, you've got UCLA, USC, who, as you mentioned earlier, their only losses to Notre Dame, who is the fourth number one seed. Um, it's I don't know. Is there seem like a clear-cut best team in right now?
To me, there's not. And I think that's a difference from what we've seen the last probably as many years as I can count back in my mind. I feel like, in particular, South Carolina, the last few years have felt like they're kind of head and shoulders above everyone else. And I don't really feel that way about this season. I think that when you look at a team like South Carolina, they're still very, very good, but they aren't as dominant as they've been in past years. Obviously, they had that UCLA loss early in the season, but I just think the construction of this team is different than we've seen from South Carolina in the past years. There's no really dominant force inside that's kind of just making them so much better than everyone else. So I think you could probably make an argument that between South Carolina, USC, Notre Dame, UCLA, I would say probably that's the group right now. And then Texas and UConn probably your next year. That's still, I would say, a part of that top group of teams that, like, if you're talking about who can win a national championship, I don't think you leave those two out of the conversation yet.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because I'm looking at your latest bracketology, and you have LSU as a two seed and they're currently undefeated. So I'm going to assume, just kind of looking over the resume, is this more just because the quality wins just aren't there, or what's up with that?
Yeah, they didn't play a ton of big games in their non-conference, so that's what's really hurting them right now. I think maybe since picked up one more this weekend, that's a Q1 win because I think the Vanderbilt win was a Q1 win, but they're at 3-0 in Q1 right now, which is just a step behind, I think, what we've seen from some of these other teams. And then as much as it's quad one wins, like South Carolina, Texas, UConn, UCLA, USC, Notre Dame have all played a subset of each other. So I think we've seen kind of what those teams look like against each other, whereas LSU hasn't quite played a game at that level yet. And it's coming, right? They're going to have to play South Carolina and Texas in conference play. So we'll see it eventually.
All right, Megan, let's talk about something that's near and dear to your heart. UConn basketball. UConn passed the 3.25 million mark in ticket sales last year. As I read this story, I actually had to read it a couple of times because there's a couple of other stories that have come out at about the same time that I'm also going to throw by you. This puts them ahead of 75 men's teams. So this part of the equation should be enough. And if it's not, I'm going to throw in the second part here in just a moment to say women's basketball has arrived, and it's proven in the numbers. It's going to get better in another area. Like I said, I'll bring that up in just a moment. But your thoughts on this and UConn setting this bench now, because what's happened is somebody has got to be the first. Somebody has got to break that mold and to help everybody else elevate and see. Your impressions of what this means and how exciting this is actually for the program there.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think UConn and a handful of other programs as well that have been kind of part of this top group recently have kind of really shown what can happen when you do spend the time and spend the money and invest in women's basketball. And obviously UConn's been doing that for a long time now. Gino's been there for 40 years. It's crazy. So I think you're seeing the financial benefits of that now, and I can guess what the second piece that we're going to talk about shortly here. And I just think it's so important that people can see what the benefits of investing in this is. And unfortunately, like it takes numbers like this to make it feel worthwhile to a lot of programs across the country, but hopefully seeing some of these numbers is going to be the next step that can take it to the next level because people are realizing that there's money to be made.
Yeah. There is, and finally, with a little bit of pushing, I would put it in a slightly different way, but pushing is basically what's been happening here. The NCAA is finally going to start paying women's basketball teams for tournament games. Now that's the one that I've been watching, and I'm going like, how has this not happened before? Now I've got the answer. I know, anybody who's in touch knows, but and let's talk about why. Here's part of the reason why. The women's title game had 3 million more viewers than the men's title game. Now, look, the sport is delivering. And again, your thoughts on this, and then I'm going to take you to another angle, and we'll see where that takes us.
Yeah, to me, this is the big one. As much as like the 3 million number from UConn is flashy and exciting, like I think people recognize that everyone's not going to be UConn, right? Like there's a lot of long-term success there that is a part of that number as well. But this is a money that is achievable at a much broader level, making the tournament, winning a game in the tournament. And I think that's huge in terms of organizations within each of these conferences, but also at the individual schools levels, recognizing that there's money coming if you're investing in women's basketball and there's an opportunity to make money. And I think while there's the top, and it's a much bigger top group now that of schools that have clearly made that investment, there's still a large discrepancy in a lot of places between the investment and the facilities and everything else that the women's programs are getting versus the men's. And I think this hopefully provides the incentive that some of those organizations need to take the next step and invest in their women's program and recognize that there's an importance in doing that.
Yeah. Amen to that. The third thing that I've got here has to do with NIL and how important it is, just what you just said, how important it is for people to start seeing that there are benefits to investing in women's basketball and women's sports, period. And if people are too knuckleheaded to not be able to read demographics, that's their problem. But one of the things that happened just recently also that has intrigued me is a guy who went to University of Virginia, who helped to create Reddit, supports women's basketball at UVA and has just donated a fairly substantial sum of money to that school and specifically to that program and some other women's sports, which is a good thing. And you're talking about people stepping up and making those contributions. This is another example of where this guy, I don't know how old he is, but it doesn't look like he's more than about maybe 40. So he's made, he's made his money tech wise and he's doing okay, but he's putting money back. He's putting, his money where his mouth is and making a difference. These are the sort of things that are you seeing more of these sort of instances across the NCAA? And I know that you pointed out just a moment ago that there's too many programs that aren't seeing it. Let's just put yet at the end of that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing more investment across the board from alumni and things like that, companies in terms of investing in the women's program. I think there's been a recognition with NIL that there's, in a way, a very specific market with women's sports, and that these players are playing in women's basketball, particularly. These players, the top players in women's basketball, are playing 4 years in college. It's a very different world from the men's game where your top players are one and done. Maybe they're there for 2 years. So there's just a connection between the fans and the players that I think you don't necessarily get in the football and the men's basketball world as much as you do in the women's basketball. And I think that extends to women's volleyball, gymnastics, some of the other women's sports that are seeing the benefits of this as well. And I think brands are recognizing an ability to capitalize on that, and that people are connected to these players, and it's a really good opportunity for them.
I like how you point out the fact that when players are staying there longer, there's a connectivity, and the fans really appreciate that. And I think that's a big reason why a lot of these programs, not only the talent level, I think is just phenomenal, but the fact that you do have some connectivity there, and you get to build a program as you indicate that when you have somebody like Gino who's been there for 40 years, long before dinosaurs roamed the earth. Just kidding. He's done a phenomenal a phenomenal thing with that program and built it into something that everybody on the outside looking in has gone, how do we do the same thing? And now you have Don Staley doing the same thing down at South Carolina. It has been done, but only briefly at other schools along the way, North Carolina, Notre Dame, etc. But hopefully this is something that will continue to happen, and this NIL money will help to make a big difference. Let's get back into the bracket, and Will, I'll let you take the ball and run with it, but dribble while you're doing it.
I was asking about Paige Beckers and whether or not she is back yet.
I don't have the game on currently, but I believe the socials were teasing it for tonight. So I do think she is back on the court tonight, or it looked like she was likely going to be back tonight.
Okay, awesome. As a person from Minnesota, I like to see people thrive, and obviously we love her here. So let me just go continue on to the around the bracket a little bit. Obviously we're ACC nation, so we like to follow the ACC schools, and Duke is a team that, it doesn't matter if it's men's or women's basketball. Duke is Duke. Women's side, especially, you're going to get a really tough defensive game. And if you score 70 on them, hats off to you. Feels like more of the same this year with them.
Yeah, and I think this team has been a little perplexing, and it felt like maybe that wasn't the identity of this team early on in the season. We were seeing, a good defense, but a team that was putting up a lot of points. I think back to that win over Oklahoma, that was like a game into the hundreds. Of course, it went into one overtime, but just seeing Duke score 100 points is not something we're accustomed to associating with Duke women's basketball over the top few years. But I think as we've gotten into conference play and into the last month or so of the season, we've started to see that identity come back, and that there's been a lot of grinded out games. The North Carolina game being the perfect example about a week ago, which Duke lost, but they're back to that defensive identity.
I'm interested in this North Carolina team because it feels like this is like the ultimate team right here. They play really good team basketball to me. What can you tell us about the Tar Heels?
Yeah, I think another team that's been really solid defensively. I think that's what stood out to me about North Carolina this season is their defense. And pretty much every game. I think there's like one lone exception when they played Georgia Tech, but their defense has been really fantastic this season. And then, like you said, it's very much team basketball. There's not really one player that's flashy on offense that's leading the way here. It's a team effort, and they're getting a pretty even distribution across really all their starters in terms of scoring. I think this is a team that's probably going to make the second weekend. Like they're a solid basketball team. I feel like they're probably lacking that star power into like their ability to make it to the next level. But at the same time, like I think this is a very good basketball team.
Florida State you have on the 8 line, and I don't think many people know this, but the current leading scorer in NCAA plays for Florida State.
Yep, Tanaya Latson continues to be great. There's no denying that. She's just so fun to watch, so electric to watch. I think the offense of this team in general is so far, it is so fun to watch. The defense leaves a little bit to be desired, and I think that's what causes a lot of their volatility is just if they're on the offensive end and hitting shots, they can beat anyone on any given night. But at the same time, when the shots aren't falling, they can lose to anyone on any given night. And I think we've seen that kind of play out throughout this season. No bad losses for this team. I think this is the type of team that if they can find ways to pick up some bigger wins in ACC play is probably going to climb up those rankings a little bit and probably fall somewhere a little higher than the 8 line.
If y'all haven't, do yourself a favor and go look at Tanaya Lotson's game log from this season. I think it's like 8 straight games with at least 20 points or something like that. It's pretty crazy. I feel like Georgia Tech has been one of the big surprises of the season. They were one of the last undefeateds left in all overall. I know they've taken a couple of losses so far in conference play. Well, what can you tell us about Georgia Tech?
Yeah, I feel like there's always a team every season that's like not really on anyone's radar, and then they come out and surprise you. And Georgia Tech has certainly been this season's kind of iteration of that team. I don't think they were in any of the preseason rankings, anything like that. But like you said, one of the last undefeated teams has just been really fun to watch. Like you said, they've dropped a couple in conference play to start here, but in general, just a team that I've been pleasantly surprised by, and I'm excited to see them kind of against Notre Dame. And I believe that's some point this week or this weekend, so that game should be a fun one. Um, this is a team I feel like maybe was with their undefeated start was flying a little close to the sun, and I think we're seeing a little bit of a comeback down to earth as they're starting conference play, which we tend to see with a lot of these teams that kind of make it through non-conference undefeated, but maybe don't play the toughest of schedules. They had some good wins in there, but nothing at the kind of top level. So we'll be interested to kind of see how the conference play, ACC play shakes out for them.
So I don't see Cal in here just yet, but they seem to be on the rise and making an impression. So let's step outside of the bracket for just a minute and talk about whether or not this is a team that you think could, if they continue to go the route they're going, could show up in your bracket as we get closer to the conference tournaments.
Yeah, I think they definitely are a team that could show up and a team that is trending in that direction if I don't already have them in there. They didn't play a whole lot of big games in non-conference play, which is kind of what's probably hurting them if they're not in there already. But I think they've obviously got plenty of opportunity to pick up those wins in ACC play, and we've seen that with NC State, with Florida State. So definitely a team that is trending in the right direction, and I kind of expect at this point we'll probably see them in the field. Only 2 losses in January, and for a team in the ACC is a good place to be. And if they don't let the wheels fall off down the stretch here, I think they're in really good shape to be on the field.
So I skipped over them. You actually have.
Okay. I was like, in my head, I was like, I feel like they got to be in there. How can they not be in there?
I kept looking and I skipped over them. But nonetheless, I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on Cal because they do seem to be rolling along. Let's talk about a team that I know that is not on your list anywhere. I hope because I can't have 2 in a row here. Stanford. In the past, Stanford has been just this monster program. What's going on here?
Yeah, I think I think I have them in my first four out right now, and I think they're not trending in the right direction here. I think you're seeing the impact of a few things. The impact of you just had Tara Vanderveer, who's been there for a long time, retire, and that is the huge transition at the head coaching position, coupled with the fact that you're now moving to the ACC. And I feel really bad for some of these West Coast teams that are in these new conferences with just the travel schedule for a basketball player with these new conference schedules. That's really tough, especially someplace like Stanford where the academic load is also so demanding. I think that's a really hard sell. And then they also have the added challenge of they have to be able to recruit players that can also match up to the Stanford academic standard as well. So that just poses another challenge there in terms of recruiting and bringing in transfers and things like that as well. So I just think we're seeing a shift in this program, and I think it's an unfortunate result of the end of the Pac-12. But I can't say I would be shocked if we don't necessarily see Stanford get back to the level that they were under Tyler Vanderveer. I just think that the circumstances that they've been dealt is going to make that a really uphill battle.
Really tough. Yeah. I can see that. You also have Virginia Tech right in there with them as one of those first four out. Um, with the change in coaching, that made a big difference. However, they've got some good players on the floor right now, and I've been watching very carefully and seeing some people step up, and it's encouraging.
Yeah, I feel like this is a team that's ahead of schedule, even if they don't make the field this year to be in the talks for that. I think for a first year head coach with Megan Duffy there, like it's not a bad spot to be in a big transition year. And as she brings in talent, they'll get there. I was a big fan of this coaching hire in general. Have been around Megan Duffy from UConn in the Big East, and when she was at Marquette, I think she's a great coach, and like this was a great hire. So I think if they don't make it this year, they're just a year or two from being back there. It's just a matter of her having the time to bring in the players and reestablish the culture.
What did you think of Kenny Brooks taking off and taking over another program? I mean, he's a
It
good.
is what it is. It is the coaching carousel that we see.
He's a
I've been really impressed with what he's done at Kentucky so far, though. We talked about a Kentucky team that has not had a lot of success recently and is, I'd say, well ahead of schedule in the Kenny Brooks era, which
yeah.
not really that surprising when you think about what Kenny Brooks has accomplished at Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and to be frank about it, if you go back into his high school days, um, it'll be even more impressive. Kenny is a really good person, and he's smart. He's basketball savvy. So yeah, it's not surprising to see him do well there. And I wish him the best, even though it's the SEC. Anyway, Will.
Couple more teams I wanted to bring up before our time is through. If you go to herhoopstats.com and look at the win share leaders, you will see that TCU has the number 3 and number 4 players listed in win share, and Sedona Price and Haley Van Lith. Now, this is the team. Obviously, we know Haley Van Lith from her previous travels, but this seems like a really another team. Maybe a little top heavy, but they're still going to be better than most teams on a given night.
Yeah, I think this is a team that I'm excited about, and I think we're going to learn more about as they go through Big 12 play, but I think they might be the best team in the Big 12. I think Van Lith has fit really nicely into her role there. I think we saw her really struggle in the role that she was in at LSU, and I think this very much looks like the Haley Van Lith that we were accustomed to seeing at Louisville this year, and it's clearly coming through in the numbers with the win shares as well. And then Sorana Prince, now that she's finally healthy, because she's had quite her fair share of injuries through her college career, the two of them together, I think, is a really great pair. And this is a team I'm excited about. And yeah, a team I think that on any given night could get anyone in the country with the talent that they have.
So you mentioned earlier talking about the potential of the Ivy League having two bids. You currently have Harvard in as an eight, I think it was an eight. An eight, and Princeton was, I believe, one of the last teams in. Is there a realistic chance they could stay in?
Yeah, I think I actually have
Or-
Princeton in as the auto qualifier right now. So the way we do auto qualifiers for her hoop stats, it's the team in the conference that has the highest her hoop stat rating. So I think the case for Princeton or Columbia to get an at-large bid is maybe not great right now, but I think Harvard has a really nice case for an at-large bid. So should Princeton, Columbia, someone come out in the top of that conference championship, I think they'd probably put two in.
Who are some of the teams in the more traditional one bid leads we need to keep our eyes on?
Yeah, I've been following the A10 quite a bit. I think the trio of Richmond, George Mason, St. Joe's, whoever gets in from that group is going to be kind of the 10 seed that no one wants to see in this tournament. I think they've played some tough games, even though Richmond has lost some of the big ones. They've kept them close, so they've been competitive. So those are ones I'm keeping an eye on. South Dakota State as well, just always has a good team no matter what it seems, but they're another one too that feels like they have a really experienced squad this year and is a team that can make some noise in March.
Yeah, it feels like every year South Dakota State is just one of those teams. They're like a lock, and I feel like always gives somebody a scare in the tournament. So that really Jim.
I like that part. Always give somebody a scare. There's nothing better than that. Overall, at this point in the season, would you pick? Let's forget about the top teams. Is there a team among everybody that you're seeing that you think is really going to come up and bite somebody?
It's a good one. Trying to think who jumps out at me. I feel like I struggle with that question a little bit just because like I do feel like there's a very clear cut top tier and like I expect that those six teams are gonna make up most of our final four. Tennessee is a team though that I think I mean we're still kind of near the top but not totally in that top group that I think has the potential with the way that they're playing right now to kind of get someone on any given night. If the threes are falling, they're relying so heavily on that three-point shot, but it's been a really fun team to watch. And the three-point shooting, I think, is a variable that if they just are really hot from three, they could go on a crazy run.
Megan, as always, great information, a great insight into NCAA women's basketball. We love to have you on and to share this wealth of knowledge. Want people to make sure that they come visit you at Her Hoop Stats. Megan Gower, our special guest, talking about NCAA women's college basketball on ACC Nation. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank
Megan.
you for having me.
Thanks for listening to ACC Nation. Be sure to listen, like and subscribe to our podcast, radio, and YouTube channels by visiting accnation.net. Follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, Mastodon, Threads, Blue Sky and Reddit at ACC Nation.
ACC Nation.